Hello, my friends. John LaRuffa here with another straight up solo. And in this episode, we're going to do something a little different. I'm going to teach you a solo variant that I have adapted from the bits and pieces I can piece together from what is possibly the official solo variant of Anno 1800. Okay? Now, for anybody who is watching this video near the late October timeframe in 2021, the solo rules for this game, there's actually a solo campaign and a skirmish mode that have been released in German as a promotional item. And that release was available at the Spiel convention this year in 2021, but not made available for anyone else outside of that convention and has not been put into English yet. And so far, that information is elusive for us who bought the game in the United States, the English version, hoping to get that solo version, which is supposed to be eminently released for months and months and months now. So what I did was I took the information I could gather from people around the Board Game Geek community, from watching the Rado video where he runs through an early prototype version of it, and then filled into the gaps along with those things to try to get a fully soloable, fun, playable variant, unofficial variant to this game. So I'm going to teach you that today so that if you bought this game like me, hoping to play it solo and are sitting there without the ability to do so, maybe you could try this variant. It's unofficial, it's inspired by the one that is official, and give it a try. At least from now until whenever that gets released to the general masses, you'll have this to play the game with. And once that happens, hopefully we will all be able to play the official solo variant, but the point of this right now is to at least get us something to go on. All right, let's get started.
All right, folks, and as usual, please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't done so already, as it greatly helps me build my community. So you are going to set up the game exactly like you would set up a two-player game, being the one player here, the same ratio of your different citizens. So you've got the green, the blue, and the red in that same ratio as they recommend, or as they tell you to. In the board game, in the two-player, you're to set everything up as they tell you to as well. The additional things you're going to do is you're going to put this solo board, it's the same exact board as a player board, sorry about the glare. You're going to put this in play. We're going to use that to basically trade with, and I'll show you what that means in a second. You're going to draw cards just like they tell you to do in the two-player setup, and you're going to draw 7 of the 3-point cards. You are going to, if you draw any that have this noble purple, you're going to put that back. You're going to discard that, and you're going to put it on the bottom of the discard pile. You're going to draw a new card, because if you draw this one and you get to play it, it's far too powerful of an action to happen at the very beginning of the solo game. It'll make the solo mode way too easy. So, all right, we're going to pretend that's in there. So I'm doing this one-handed. Okay, the other thing you're going to do is you're going to put 25 of these cards on the top of the deck, 10 of these cards in the middle, and 15 on the bottom for a distribution that looks like this, okay? And this is going to be your timer, all right? This is inspired from the official, I think the official variant. Hopefully it's got the same situation still going on, but that'll give you 50 turns. So this game is going to be 50 turns long. At the beginning of each turn, you are going to draw one of these cards out, and you are going to compare the 2 resources that are shown up here. And as long as 2 or more of them match in the resources here, I'm not talking about trade tokens, but 2 or more of these types of goods match something you can produce down here on your board, you will then take 1 gold, okay? And so in the beginning, I don't have sausage and I don't have canned goods, so I would not take a gold there. Also, just like in the normal game, you are going to set up your situation here with 2 trade tokens and 1 of the exploration fighting tokens itself. You're not going to start with any gold. You're not going to start with anything else. All right. The other thing you're going to do is draw the gold cards, but you're going to not play with any gold cards that would penalize you for having leftover cards, because I'll tell you my idea of how to make that some tension at the end. You're also going to discard and redraw any cards that would say the most of something. So for instance, I think I've got one on the bottom here.
This is the card. You're not going to play with this card because we're going to do something different. Here, this is where if you have the most of these things, you'd either get 10 or 4, depending on the situation here. We're not going to do any of those cards there. I decided that it does not really add anything to it to set an arbitrary number, like you have to have at least 7 or something like that. That require a ton of play testing. I haven't done that. So you're just going to use ones that don't rely on any majorities, okay? And you're going to play with those cards exactly the same way as you'd play with them in the multiplayer game. Besides that, every piece of the game is the same. The turns are the same. Your actions are the same. You can do whatever you would normally do in the actual 2-player game. And your goal is still going to be the same, to try to end the game with getting the most points possible and play all the cards in your hand, okay? Now, in order to bridge the gap of trading with the player that does not exist, you can trade with the AI opponent. The AI opponent will not take any turns. He will basically be there, he or she, how you want to look at it, will be there to handle any trades that you do. So you can basically trade for any goods that are on the AI opponent's board by spending the appropriate number of trade tokens here, either 1 for a green worker, 2 for the blue, 1 for the blue, 2 for the red, 3 for the purple. Now, in the solo variant, one answer I could not get an answer for is, what do you do when you spend extra to buy an industry? Okay, I know that Rado talks about buying an industry by paying an additional token. I think that makes total sense for the blue ones, so that you can basically pay 2 trade tokens if you wanted him to build or her to build this, this particular industry, have it available from now on with you to trade. Okay, that's fine. But I think that there needs to be an additional situation when you start building the red or the purples. And what I'm going to propose is that if you build the red or the purples, that you must have the ability to, for these, you have to have the ability at least to provide the trade good that's there. Okay, so what I'm going to suggest here from this variant is that while you don't necessarily have to build it in your own area yourself, you have to have access to that trade good yourself. Okay, and then you can pay that. Additionally, you have to pay double the price of the trade good for the color associated. So in this case, being in it's a red, you'd pay 4 trade tokens, pardon me, and I keep saying trade goods, but the new world goods, like for instance here, it's the sugar cane or the tobacco. All right, so you have to have access to that in these cards that you flip over, okay, to get access to them. You don't have to spend anything, you just have to have access, and then you have to go ahead and pay double the cost there. On these pieces right here, you have to have access to at least one of the 2 tokens, or the 2 goods, and you also have to exhaust one of these purple noble tokens. So that way, that makes it a little bit more difficult to just do that. But my big concern with the way that I saw things, if you just extrapolated going extra from that by paying just, let's for instance say 3 or 4, is that it's very easy to build these kinds of tiles out of order in a weird way from the for the AI, and kind of speed things up and sort of cheapen the experience. So I like the idea that you have to have at least most of what's there, plus you have to pay some extra trade tokens. It simulates, I think, some of the build-up in the game, so you can't just go skipping things to one of these better buildings. In the ones that don't have the purple, you have to have 2 of the 3 goods here, or 2 of the 3 items. And this is the sticking point, this guy right here, because this is tough. And I think in order to make it fair in this game, that this needs to be precipitated by you having this. So what I would recommend that you do as a player is, in order to build any of these 2 right here that don't have that requirement, you make sure that you have access to both of these left ones. That way you don't just skip it and just go to this, because those are really easy to get, but that sewing machine takes some doing. So I think in the spirit of the game, that makes also sense that you'd have the sewing machine and this, and then you'd be able to trade up for them to build that if you don't build it yourself. And that finally gets us to these buildings over here. I believe it makes sense that you'd have the one of the 2 goods on the left, but also have
the blue to exhaust, and you'd still have to pay, in this case, 6. And I think that is particularly difficult to do, and enough to provide what I would say enough tension in order to get these buildings out. Otherwise, it'd be really cheap, kind of broken, where you just pay a couple of trade tokens, and all of a sudden, boom, you're making this. You're making the, the cart. Well, the car needs to have it needs to be a little more difficult for you to make just then to jump to that. So that's what I'd recommend there. Now, with regards to these cannot be built by the opponent. They all have to be built by you, so there's nothing there as far as using those trade tokens. And so that, I think, bridges the biggest gap and the biggest question that I had with regards to how do I treat that, because the way that Rado's video talked about it only explained the simpler buildings, and that made a lot of sense. But when I got to this point, I said, well, that's just too big of a jump in quote-unquote technology chains, or however you want to look at production chains, to make that realistic. So try that out. Again, on these, you have to be able to have access yourself to the special New World export goods, and you have to double it up. On these, you have to you have to exhaust the noble worker and one of the two over here, okay? Your choice. On this one, you have to have access to the two on the left, and I would also say the two on the left over here. And this case, it could be either or because of this. And then finally down here, it's got to be, I think, the toughest of them all. So you'd have to have access to one of these to spend and this resource, one of these to spend and this resource, one of these and this. So something to make it challenging. I haven't play tested enough to be sure what that should be, but I would recommend you think about it and do it the way you want, okay? Then finally, as the game finishes, you have 50 turns to be able to exhaust the deck. If you exhaust the deck and before you exhaust the deck, you are able to play all your cards. You get the 7 points and you total up your score just like you would in the normal version and be in good shape. My proposition for you is if you don't beat the deck, what happens is that you, instead of gaining points for the cards or just ignoring the cards you didn't play, you actually lose those points. So if you end the game where you have these 3 cards in play, you would subtract 19 from your final score. Also, my supposition is that you play as if the opponent would score full value for each of these goals that are out there. With the exception being this, I would just make that a 6, okay? So any of these per artifact visits, I would say that would be a plus 6. This would be plus all of these, okay? So that'd be 3, 6, 9, 12, 18, 21, 24. So that's a big one. This would be, I would say you'd make it 18 because that was similar to another goal in here that's worth 18. This would be 6, and 6 would be 12. This would not score him anything. It's actually helpful for you if you get the editor to try to work some of these cards out. And as a, just baseline thing to make it a little better than just straight up beat your score, although that's ultimately what this would be, I would say that if you score more than 100 points, you could consider that a victory for your first game, and then go up in increments of 5 or 10, however you want to, in subsequent games to try to continue to beat your own score and challenge yourself. So the rest of it, all the other actions that you could do are exactly the same that you'd find in here. So you're doing everything else the same. It keeps the maintenance extremely low from an overhead standpoint. Yes, it is a bit of a beat your score, but I think some of those conditions might help with people who are averse to that. And I think that provides a bunch of tension with the fact that these points not only will not help you, but they will go negative to your score if you just have a ton of different cards out here that you never fulfilled. And that keeps you from just having a runaway situation where you're just adding more and more and more people without that tension that you would normally get in the base game. And everything else, again, the same. So if you want to draw more of those cards, you can draw them. The AI does not get any of these cards. They would only get bonuses for this kind of thing. And I said that 6 is probably the right amount for something like that. The AI doesn't take any other action with these cards besides just discarding them 1 to 50. And after that, the game is over. There is not an extra round. After that final turn, when the last card is played, you have your action, and that's it, 50 points. So that is what I'm going to propose for a very unofficial, inspired by potentially the official, don't want to get sued or in trouble here, way to play this game as a solo with minimal overhead. So let me tell you about what I think about the game played in this direction and see if it's something that you want to do.
Okay, so I hope that helps you to be able to enjoy Anno 1800. If you don't have a way to play it solo because you didn't buy the German solo promotional thing at Essen Spiel because you couldn't, because you're like me and you couldn't get there, and you're not getting any support from anybody else. Regrettably, I could tell you, I did my best to try to find out this information, to get these answers explained. I even emailed the designer of the solo game, and their response was that they did not feel like they could appropriately teach the game via Geek Mail, which I understand, but they didn't answer my two questions, which was specifically, what's the distribution of different cards in this 50-person deck, and how do I deal with the idea of the solo opponent, so to speak, building those different buildings to make the game still feel like it would in a normal two-player or more game. So I worked those other things out, and then there was the other nuances of how do I add some tension here and different things, and that's where I came up with some of that scoring situation. Now, it might be very easy for experienced players to beat that 100. I don't know. I've only played this game a couple of times solo, and I did it not even with some of those things in play because I was kind of doing a hodgepodge version of it, just waiting for that official expansion to come out or the official rules to come out, and they never have. So I kind of lost my patience and decided to do this. So I hope this is helpful for you. This game will appeal to people who love production chains, who like turning this into that so that these things can happen. It is definitely an A becomes B, B unlocks C, A and B then can unlock D, etc. And I think that's fun. I think the design of this game is really good. I enjoy it. I know that some people could say it's long. I don't find it long when you play the solo version as I described it. That's 45 minutes to an hour. It might be much longer when you play it with multiple people, but the setup time being a little tedious with all those buildings to put out, once it's going, you really can kind of, course through your turns really quickly. Flip a card. Do I get a gold out of it? No. If it doesn't match. Oh, and by the way, I want to make this clear. If you get to these deeper cards, okay, and there are 3 icons here, I've played it, you only have to match 2 out of the 3 to be able to pay the gold. Also, on this card right here, this does not count as a matched icon. You have to match those 2. Again, I think that appropriately provides the right amount of gold infusion and rewards the players for having a breadth of industry tiles versus, just having the specialized little bits. So I think that's good. The rest of it, I think, plays really well. I'm a big fan of the design as it is, and I think it'll appeal to people who like those types of things. I also could see people saying that this is a dry game. It's a cube pusher, and it is. It is a cube pusher. I wouldn't necessarily say it was quote-unquote dry. It's a type of game that would appeal to some, maybe most, that like Euro games, but there's a population out there that would not like to just say, well, I'm just turning this into that. It could get repetitive, because basically it is true that while the cards you have dictate what you're going to do and the bonuses dictate a little bit, this game does not necessarily vary from one game to the next all that much. There are a couple of different strategies you can take, but they all kind of funnel down that same efficiency channel. So I would say that for folks who are looking for a diverse, group of strategies and different ways to win and different ways to score and things like that, you're not going to find that here. The bulk of your points are going to be made by trying to get yourself to these 8-point cards. And once you score these are big point scores. You're going to score a bunch of 3s, a couple of 5s, and then hopefully a couple 8s. And of course, how you maximize those different bonuses is going to be key. Because in this case, what you're doing is you're trying to maximize those just so that you can minimize the scoring potential of what the AI is going to do. And I said the AI is going to subtract points from you for every card you don't do. When it scores those points for the bonuses, it's also going to subtract those. So I think when you come up with all that subtraction, it's going to be pretty tough, I think, to get to 100 points. I could be wrong. I haven't play tested it a ton. I just want to try to get people in there in the community something to play with because it's been frustrating. And lastly, I'll leave you with that. I don't understand the approach that Cosmos has taken here. Perhaps they have a grandiose plan and they don't feel like communicating it, or they don't care to communicate it in one of the largest repositories for board game information, that being Board Game Geek. I kind of find that insulting and disappointing. Insulting because the original designer of the solo mode was active in the forums for a while and then all of a sudden just vanished. And I'm sure it was because Cosmos said, let us take care of this, let us handle it. And that is the theme that I got when I received his geek mail is, well, the focus of what I was doing was really around the campaign. I think you should wait for that to happen, but I don't know when that's going to happen. Well, that's great, but I think a lot of us would like to do something with our game that we paid $70 American with before that, instead of just waiting there. And yes, it'd be nice if I could find someone to play this type of game with. I just don't have that right now. My gaming group, when we get together, occasionally we play other things. And I wish we'd play this, but you know, that's just the way it is. And I like to play solo games the vast majority of what I do. So I'm hoping that this variant, while unofficial, but inspired by what I think is the official version, will at least help you to enjoy the game somewhat as it's helped me to enjoy it somewhat. And with that, I thank you for watching. Please feel free to put your comments, your suggestions in both on Board Game Geek, where I'm going to post this, in any of the forums there. I've still subscribed to them, so I'd be happy to tweak things and use your ideas, and maybe we can get something going here where we can make a good working solo variant that will tide us over until the official one becomes more widely available. So that's what I'm hoping for. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and whatever you do in the future, I hope you enjoy yourself gaming with whatever you play. Thanks, everybody. See ya.